Hello and welcome to the Cook and Swig podcast, where we discuss theology, philosophy, maybe some politics. I'm your host, Josh Swigert. I'm a teacher in Dare Village, Oregon, and I'm talking to our main guest, although we may have different guests later, talking to our main guest, Joe Cook. Hi, Joe.
Hello, Mr. Swigert. How are you?
Good. Tell us where you are and how you got there.
I am currently living in Casper, Wyoming. I moved from the Willamette Valley in Oregon, and it is a beautiful sunshiny day here. And my entire family moved, including my wife's mom, for a variety of different reasons.
Yeah, so that's what I want to talk about on our first episode, our pilot episode. Why move away, and maybe there'll be kind of two threads here. Why did you move away, and then applying that to others that may be considering the same thing for various reasons. So maybe we should just start with your personal example. Why did you guys move away?
Yeah, we moved away from Oregon for a variety of different reasons. Probably two major ones, and then sort of a large number of minor ones. One of the major ones, I'll start with the easy one, I guess, which is fairly obvious to anyone who is religious and is religious in a traditional sense. And it would be that Oregon is not a place that is really friendly to traditional religious values. And that is affected largely politically in what is done in Oregon. And so one of the reasons
political your second reason, or is that
I would say
all the first reason?
I would say that political is probably my second reason, but I think that's what I'm going to talk about first.
Okay.
Is the politics, because it's easier and less difficult to explain. And again, it's pretty obvious to a lot of people who are in Oregon that are somewhat conservative. And so over the last few years, through COVID, with very, very stringent lockdowns, and with all kinds of really arbitrary government regulation in regards to the way that we live our lives, and with the concern that it could be worse in the future, it seemed like it might be good to remove ourselves from that sort of mild despotism, and then potentially much worse in the future. Examples include, of course, teaching for 2 years wearing a stupid mask, which is a minor thing, and then something more major where the government comes along and says, "Oh, if you don't take this experimental vaccine, you'll be fired from your jobs." And that happened to my wife. She was fired from her job for refusing to take this experimental COVID vaccine. And I mean, at that point, what do? You just keep living in that, find a different job where they don't care quite as much. Hope that COVID goes away, which it largely has for now. And so combine that with things like, if you are somewhat conservative and you vote for I don't think I've ever voted for anyone in Oregon that's actually won in my entire life.
Okay.
And so my views are always ignored, combined with things like, hey, not only in Oregon is abortion legal, but it's celebrated and paid for by tax dollars. And now with the overturn of Roe v. Wade, there are other states that Christians can and I think should move to support governments with their money that it's not used for killing unborn children. And so, yeah, politically moving away from sort of the despotism to a state that's free, largely Wyoming, it's a good reason to move. Like I say, it's one of the major reasons. And moving to a place where the state supports life rather than a culture of death. And Oregon has been always at the forefront of this culture of death, right? Going back to the 90s, not only was abortion legal for a long time, but doctor-assisted suicide was first pushed and legalized in Oregon and celebrated in Oregon. And so Oregon is just a very dark place politically, and I would say spiritually. I kind of halfway joke that there is a cloud of demons in the air above the state. But like I said, it's only kind of a halfway joke.
Because there actually may be.
Because there actually may be demons in the air above the state of Oregon.
Maybe at least in Salem.
And definitely Portland and on the streets.
Yeah. So what you're saying is they didn't do masks and vaccines in Wyoming?
For the most part, it was a lot less insisted upon here. Just a lot more freedom. The school that I'll be talking about here in a little bit, I'll be sending my children to, closed down very, very briefly. Didn't require vaccines or for the teachers or masking for anyone. In the first few months. I mean, the spring, they kind of closed down like everybody else, but by the time fall rolled around, life in Mount Hope Classical Lutheran School was back to normal, where the rest of us were not.
I want to press into the mask and vaccine issues, and they might be different, but I'm going to lump them together. Let's put the effectiveness of, okay, let's say a mask aside and say if somebody is uncomfortable with you, with a mask on in their 6-foot bubble or whatever, why not do the Christian thing? You brought up that you are, traditionally Christian, traditionally religious. So why not sacrifice your own freedom in order to kind of have a clean conscience for the other person to kind of live freely and have a loving relationship with them?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a real nice thought, I suppose. But in the long term, you have to ask yourself the question, is it actually loving to go along with people's imaginary ideas and support them in their fantasies and in their maybe even in their perversions?
Well, so Paul in 1 Corinthians 9, when we're talking about food that's sacrificed to idols, just for people who are aware of that issue, there was basically Jews who thought that you weren't allowed to eat food sacrificed to idols because that would be participating in idol worship. And Paul actually commands the Gentiles who were comfortable with eating, pagan sacrifices because they've always done it, that it's actually fine that they can go ahead and eat the food that's sold in the market, unless a Jew who thinks it's idolatry is around them.
Right. Well, we're talking about two different things here. You're talking about Christian
deference, maybe?
Yeah, Christian deference. And I'm talking about sort of long-term societal effects of arbitrary government regulation that is very intrusive.
And so you're saying that sometimes we shouldn't be deferent when you're saying we shouldn't always lay down and just basically listen to the other guy. Sometimes that's harmful.
Yes, of course it is. Like I say, the long-term effect overall in society can be very, very harmful. And so, on a personal level, sure. I mean, if someone really was uncomfortable with me not having a mask on, yeah, I might put a mask on. But when the government comes along without any data to back it up that masking makes a big difference and says, thou shalt wear a mask and you shall, choke on your own fumes for 2.5 years and mask up your children and double mask them. No. That's not an issue of Christian love. That's an issue of a long-term negative effect for a happy society. And so, if I have a choice where I could live in a place that does that or move to a place that doesn't do that, why would I stay there, especially where I'm trying to raise my children, which will go to my second and most important point as to why I move away.
Okay. you before we get to your second and most important point, which I'm sure involves the school that they're going to and the raising of your children in a Christian atmosphere. You keep talking about like, well, there's two things that I want to ask about. You say why stay, okay, and I could maybe give you a couple reasons why. Maybe I don't want to press into that one yet, but then you also bring up this thing like happy society, and I think that is very cliche in maybe your language and our discussions that we've had, but why don't you go into like why do you care, I guess, beyond beyond you and your own well-being and your family's well-being.
Or what I care
why
about
do you what do you mean when you say that? I don't even think people have like a framework for thinking in society, I guess is kind of where I'm getting at. So just go into describing
you're
that and then why
absolutely
that's
right.
desirable.
I think the vast majority of people would have no idea what I would mean by a happy society. The whole idea seems kind of foreign.
And maybe they think happy is like you have food, you have a job, everybody's employed. Maybe I think that's probably what people are thinking economically. Like they're a happy society because they're
that's
first
because
world
they've been
country.
that's because they've been raised in a world affected primarily by Marx that turns everything into economics, and that's just wrong. That's not a Christian perspective. The Christian perspective of a happy society is the one in which God, ultimately this is fulfilled in God's plan of a restored world. Even so, as broken human beings, we can have happier societies and less happy societies. And the happy society is the one that lives according to the design of God, that functions within God's design for societies to function. Yes, we are individuals, and as Americans, that tends to be the only thing we think about. And as Americans affected by Marx and by Rousseau, we internalize everything, make everything subjective and being authentic, while focusing primarily in the end, sort of collectively, on economics. And this is not God's ultimate plan for a happy society. So the happy society is the one that lives according to God's statutes because it creates functionality in the best sense of the word.
Okay, a quick joke and then we'll get back to this. So you're saying a capitalist is thinking about life in a Marxist way?
Essentially. Yep.
Those are juxtaposed but they should. The Marxist socialist,
the Marxists and the capitalists both think fundamentally and essentially only about money, and that is not the focus of the happy Christian life. Money is maybe in the world that we have. It's certainly necessary, but it should not be the main goal. Just because it is necessary doesn't mean it should become the prize.
Ultimate. Oh, it's not ultimate.
It's not the ultimate goal. It is a necessity. But if financial success is what you're going for in your life, as we are largely taught, you'll probably have an unhappy life. And if the whole society is focused on this, then maybe we'll be financially well off. But who cares if you have $1 billion, but no one loves you?
Well, and actually, I'll juxtapose another idea that I don't think I think there's two options that people are conditioned to approve of, to pursue. And it's either a money-filled life. They're going after a good job, a good career, or they're going after internal satisfaction. And you had mentioned that already with Rousseau and the romantic thinkers. So I actually fall kind of more under that other category and have gone into have moved to thinking more as how should I function in God's Christian world, basically in his society, in his natural world. But that's job exactly what I'm because of my internal desire to be a teacher. I really knew that it wasn't going to make a lot of money, but I thought that I would enjoy teaching. I thought it would affect a lot of people. Of course, I knew that there was some good beyond it, but I wasn't thinking that that's going to be the best job for my children and grandchildren for me to have.
Yeah, and this is absolutely the case. And you and I were both brought up into a world primarily that has embraced the philosophies of Marx and the focus on money, or the focus on internal fulfillment, kind of going back to Rousseau. Um, and obviously, I became a teacher as well. Money was not nearly as important to me as was the internal fulfillment thing. So just like you, that was my focus as well. But as I've gotten older, um, and as I've become sort of more attuned to a fully Christian view, rather than what is oftentimes emphasized in American Christian religion,
Mhm.
which is sort of you live in this secular world, you live most of your life as a secularist. However, maybe on Sunday mornings and maybe even in your private devotions, if you have them, then you can focus on your quote unquote personal relationship with Jesus. And that's the Christian life for most people. But that's not the historically Christian life. And I would also say and I would argue that that's not the biblical view of a Christian life as well. And so when I'm talking about a happy society, yeah, I'm talking not about a Marxist or capitalist or an internal fulfillment sort of a happy life, societally happy life. I'm talking more generally and more broadly about society in terms of a Christian society, which is right now what we don't have. The secularists and the Marxists and the Romantics and
The
even
Marxist capitalists.
the Marxist capitalists have been very successful in shifting our view, and I would even say, and maybe even primarily, being sneaky about it, children's education in the Western world
That's a
has
good
been largely
segue.
affected. Yes, it is. Has
So
been largely affected by what was called progressive philosophy, pragmatist philosophy,
okay.
about 19. And of course, the figurehead of that is famously John Dewey, and the Deweyites were very successful
Is that an
at,
actual term, or you just make that up?
I don't know. I
I
think I've
like
heard
that.
it before, but I could be wrong.
Okay.
Deweyites, I don't know if they're the followers of John Dewey, have been very successful in transforming our society, not by going after, and this is, by the way, so read Animal Farm by Orwell if you want to see how this would work. Not by
I think
going
you
after
cut
the
out a little bit. That's
adults.
Animal Farm.
Yeah, I believe it's Animal Farm by
Okay.
Orwell. So yeah, go after the young, because they're not going to convince the old. And then again, so why move? So politically, if my wife and I had not had any children, we would have stayed in Oregon. We would not have left. We had some good things in Oregon, really good things that to this very moment, I'm really sad about leaving. I'm sad about leaving our house. We had a lovely house. I'm sad about leaving some of our family, and really sad about and missing actually our friends. We had a great group of friends and a good church where a lot of our friends went, and I'm missing that. And we would have stayed if it hadn't have been for children, because children are very, very malleable. I've been a teacher for 14 years. I've seen how they are affected by the ideas in the classroom, but also by their friends, their friend group, and also by obviously their parents, maybe early on, and then by a culture that really does, whether we realize it or not, set about to, in some ways, condition and indoctrinate them. And so in Oregon, so my number one reason why move, yeah, the politics in Oregon aren't great. They're a lot better in Wyoming. Why move? I have children, and I would love, my goal for my children is to see them grow up to become and to remain faithful Christians.
Hmm. So
Um,
I think
and
some
where
people.
where is that likely to where is that most likely to be the case? Well, after teaching in a Christian school for 14 years and seeing the dismal results of the vast majority of my students remaining Christian,
Hmm.
I knew that for my own children, I needed to move them to a school that was better in terms of producing faithful Christians. And so that's the main reason why we moved. Yes, the politics is part of it. Frankly, this Cascadia earthquake that's going to hit Western Oregon at some point here in the next 100 years was a very minor thing, but I mean, that's going to be bad when it happens. So yeah, that's an issue. But really the main one is my kids.
Oregon is just hell.
Well, in some ways it is just hell, but in other ways, I mean, it's like, it's beautiful. It's green. I kind of miss the green. It's got the ocean and it's got beautiful mountains. I mean, the Cascade Range is beautiful. And if you haven't been to Enterprise, Oregon, or Joseph, Oregon, drive out there sometime. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And I haven't been to Jackson Hole. Too many people there for me. I understand that's beautiful, but you're going to have a hard time beating Oregon in terms of natural beauty. It's just absolutely beautiful. It's got the ocean. It's beautiful. I'm sad. I'm missing some of that.
Yeah, well, you're not wrong. It is beautiful here, and in the same boat, I can feel the cloud. It's always hard to tell if it's just the real clouds that are kind of dismal and depressing in Oregon or maybe the Northwest as a whole, or if it is more the demonic cloud that's over there. I want to press into your idea before we get on to classical schooling, which is kind of where this is headed. I want to press into talking about the culture. I think some people are skeptical that the culture is as impressing upon its ideals onto children in such a sinister way that you're describing it. Like you're literally saying that there are people out there, whether organized or not, who want to basically teach children non-Christian ideas contrary to their parents. And that's a very dark way of looking at the world. It's very pessimistic, as some people might say.
Or just look at what John Dewey said. And everyone admits that the American system is kind of based on Dewey's ideas.
Okay.
John Dewey actively taught that schooling should be non-religious or even anti-religious in order to transform children to move away from. So I guess we have to talk really quickly about his philosophy to make sense of this.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was not religious. He rejected the idea of Christianity. He rejected the idea of even objective truth. The pragmatists believe that the only truth worth pursuing is one that worked in practice. And so then what is the point of school? If no longer, after going clear back to, if you want to go way back to like Plato and Aristotle, right? Going back to pursuing goodness or pursuing the truth, to switching that to, what do we want our students to be? And John Dewey really wanted education to do a couple different things. First, he wanted the education system to produce children that could function practically in the society that they were born into, which makes some degree of sense, right? So you want your kids to be able to work in factories or whatever. And so what does the school do? It sort of conditions them to work in factories, which is literally what early Dewey schooling looked like. But more importantly for Dewey was not that. And so, so what does it do? It produces a product, right? So the children themselves become a product in order to be functional members of society. Rather than
is that in a Marxist economic world?
To some extent, yeah, for sure. Or capitalist Marxist world.
So you're
we're thinking in terms of economy.
So you're producing children who can be maybe cogs in the factory wheel to help the I guess the capitalist businessmen make money. I mean, and that kind of added that last part, but and maybe some of those kids, the smart ones, will rise up and own Amazon or Facebook or whatever business you have. But
yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of almost a sinister way to look at it, but yeah, that's definitely
that's how you're looking at it. You just threw that back on me.
I did. But John Dewey would not think of it sort of as as a way of promoting the capitalistic evil capitalism. Haha. He would look at it more in terms of kind of sounding more positive than that. Although that is kind of what it does. But most importantly, what John Dewey wanted to do was to promote education for the creation of basically progressive democratic ideals. And so to turn children into beings that can be or that can promote societal change. Maybe the term social justice warrior, which has become popular over the last 10 or 15 years, would be kind of almost a way to think of it. And that's largely what it does, right? And so no longer then in public schools do they read the classics, right? They're not reading, Plato in school, or even Jefferson, which is not really much of a classic, but you know what I mean? And instead they're reading books that promote a social agenda and social change. And so over time, what happens generation upon generation, these ideas that are being promoted, whatever they happen to be, begin to inform the way that these children, when they become adults, will participate actively within democracy. So they become agents of democratic and social change. And that is his stated goals. Like I'm not, like, he just says it. This is what he wants to do. And so what does he do? The education then moves away from kind of a teacher-centric, where the teacher announces that which is true to the students and wants the students to be creative. Do away with rote memorization and focus instead on what they would call critical thinking. And this is what I was taught.
He took memorization out of schools?
Oh, yeah. Yep,
okay,
absolutely.
Well, that doesn't sound very like, why is that? Why would he want to do that?
Well, the main reason you want to take memorization out of schools is because it doesn't promote critical thinking, according to his way of looking at it.
So he's not trying to indoctrinate. That's how he's thinking about it. He's trying to get kids to think.
That's his claim, right? Okay. And that's because so why not memorize, right? The primary reason why you wouldn't memorize is because there's not really any truth in any of the things that you would be memorizing, because remember, truth for Dewey doesn't matter, right? So why bother memorizing what's true? Because there isn't anything that's true to memorize.
So but then a Christian on the alternative would say you ought to have children memorize because there is a truth, like there is a truth. So that's why they memorize scripture or a catechism or something like that.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I went through kind of a Deweyan master's program for education. Okay. And 12 years ago, I would have said, yeah, memorization is pointless. Don't have kids do it. What matters is critical thinking. And don't get me wrong, thinking is really important. But after years of seeing students having not memorized anything, they didn't have anything to think with.
I see.
Or think about, right? Additionally, and maybe even more directly, to reject memorization is really an unchristian thing to do. It's not biblical. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, but meditates on God's word day and night, right?
Is that a Dewey poem?
Yeah, no. So the idea
of that's Psalm 1 for those of you that don't know.
Yes, and I chop part of it out, but the idea of meditation is one where you do mutter the words. You haven't memorized. It becomes part of you and informs you. And that's something that today is lost, save in classical Christian education. So
and that's where I'm actually gonna go ahead.
Yeah, so I would say that not only is it actually good in terms of like just general learning to have some things memorized, because you need to know things in order to think about things. But also just directly, it's Christian to memorize the Word of God, to memorize the Ten Commandments, to memorize the Lord's Prayer, to memorize maybe the Apostles of the Nicene Creed, to have the faith become, to have it memorized and to let those words form you. It's kind of a lost thing, but it used to be obvious to almost everyone in the Western world that that's what you did. You memorize these things, and you let those things that you have memorized, whether it be simply in word or even in song, you let those words form you and shape you.
Okay, this is going to be the last thing I bring up, and then we're going to have to do a part two, talking about classical education and kind of more defining the positives of that.
Okay.
So with this memorization, why? Because of the access we have to phones, and you're going to have to do this in 3 minutes or less, phones and computers that have information really directly to the hand of each person. That definitely, doesn't that lower, I guess I'll ask, doesn't that lower the necessity of memorization because you have access to information? Like, I don't need to memorize the Nicene Creed because I can look up the Nicene Creed anytime I want to. I don't need to memorize Psalm 1 because, I have the Bible app that I can just search to directly.
Yeah. So just because you can look at something doesn't mean it's going to form you, right? If you just look at it for a minute, it's not transformative. But if you ponder something in your heart over a long period of time, that's when you notice that it starts informing you. And if you don't believe me, try it. Right.
That would take too long.
You'll see, and you'll see that and you'll see that it does work.
And so we should, as parents and teachers, indoctrinate our students. That's what you're telling me.
Yes, because truth exists, goodness exists, and beauty exists. These things exist. They are extranos. They are outside of ourselves. And God has given us the ability to search for and to find, although at times in limited ways, these things. And that is the beauty and the glory of education, that we can find in limited capacities goodness, truth, and beauty. And that's part of what makes life wondrous and beautiful and lovely. And frankly, that's what I mean when I say, so I want my children to remain faithful Christians. I want them to live in what does that mean? What does it mean to become a faithful Christian? I think maybe we should talk about that next time as well. What does it mean to be a faithful Christian? I would say it's to live in the fullness of what God has created you to be. Okay, to live in or at least the near fullness of that, as much as we can with the sin nature that we still have. And so part of that, just by simply being human, is to discover God's goodness, his truth, and his beauty, as well as that which is found in his creation. And so, yeah, I got to put your kids in a school that is teaching that, rather than sort of half-heartedly doing the John Dewey thing. And maybe they call themselves a Christian school and throw a little bit of Jesus in on top. But that's not, and I don't mean to disparage my previous place of employment, but that's not a good way of Christian education. The good way of Christian education is to really directly teach what God has made us to be and to do. And you need to be taught directly about it, and you need to be taught regularly about it. So if a Christian school isn't doing that in a direct and purposeful way, then it's not really being a good Christian school. At least it's not being as strong as a Christian school as it could be.
You are listening to Cook and Swig. If you want to survive the demonic cloud of Oregon or figure out how to escape it, this is the place to go. We'll have part 2 for you next episode. See ya.